My name is Karen, 32 years old, a part-time chef and freelance illustrator. My husband, Daniel, and I have been married for almost 4 years. If someone asked how my marriage was, I'd say it was fine. Not bad, not amazing, just fine. But there's one thing I've always believed in. In marriage, respect is non-negotiable. And I used to think Daniel understood that. Until that night. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at home, inviting my in-laws over. Nothing special, just an ordinary Saturday night. But I wanted to create a warm family atmosphere. I spent the whole morning preparing everything myself. Herb-roasted chicken, garlic butter mashed potatoes, cherry tomato salad, crispy toast, and lemon cheesecake for dessert. The kitchen was filled with the smell of butter, and I placed each plate on the table like it was a grand celebration. I didn't do it because anyone forced me. I genuinely enjoy making the home feel cozy, love seeing people happy, but turns out my kindness had been taken for granted. Daniel's family arrived on time. My father-in-law, Bruce, was the type of man who seemed stuck in another era, spoke loudly, always acted like his opinion was law. My mother-in-law, Linda, was gentle and quiet. Daniel's younger brother, Kyle, came with his wife, Natalie. She was soft-spoken, always had a forced smile, like she didn't dare show her real emotions. When I stepped out of the kitchen, holding the last plate, my own portion, everyone was already seated at the table. I placed the plate in front of my chair, smiled, and was about to sit down. But before I could do that, a hand reached out. Bruce, my father-in-law, didn't hesitate. He grabbed my plate as if it belonged to someone else, then handed it to Kyle. "Women eat after men," he said, like it was just the natural order of things. I froze, thinking he was joking. But no, he was dead serious. Kyle nodded in thanks and started eating like nothing happened. Linda stared silently at the table. Natalie frowned slightly but said nothing. And Daniel, my husband, just looked at me and shook his head slightly. "It's tradition," he murmured, as if explaining it made the disrespect disappear. The room suddenly felt cold, even though the fireplace was glowing. No one asked if I was hungry. No one offered me another plate. I said nothing. I just stood there for a few seconds, trying to swallow the anger rising inside, then quietly sat down in the empty chair with no food in front of me. I didn't eat. I didn't smile. I didn't join in their lively conversations. I just sat there, listening to the sound of forks and knives against porcelain, smelling the delicious food I'd spent all day preparing, and feeling every heavy heartbeat in my chest. No one asked why I wasn't eating. Daniel laughed loudly at something Kyle said, as if this dinner was some heartwarming family moment. I sat there, silent like a piece of furniture. I used to think my husband was different from his family. I used to think that as long as he wasn't like them, everything would be okay. But that night, I realized something. Silence is a form of complicity. I didn't make a scene. I didn't argue or fight back right then and there. I didn't want to give them an excuse to call me too sensitive or overreacting. Instead, I started planning. A plan they would never see coming. And it would begin the following Sunday. A day after that silent dinner, I sent a group text to my in-laws. "Next Sunday, 6 p.m., I'm inviting everyone over for dinner. I have a surprise I want to share." Daniel looked at me in surprise when he saw the message. "You sure? You didn't seem happy last week." I smiled gently, turning the coffee cup in my hands. "I just feel like I still owe your family a proper dinner." He nodded, looking relieved. As for me, I began preparing for a dinner none of them would ever forget. I planned the menu like I was hosting a high-end banquet. Black pepper beef tenderloin, butter garlic steamed lobster, bacon-wrapped asparagus, creamy mashed potatoes, and vanilla panna cotta with fresh strawberry sauce for dessert. Every dish was carefully selected to create a symphony of flavors. I bought fresh flowers, scented candles, even embroidered napkins. This dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a statement. On Sunday evening, the house was filled with candlelight and the rich aromas from the kitchen. Everything was so perfect that Bruce, my father-in-law, walked in and blurted out, Looks like a 5-star restaurant this time. I just smiled, saying nothing. They didn't know that this time, the roles were about to reverse. After some polite greetings, Bruce, Kyle, and Daniel quickly pulled out chairs to sit down as usual. I watched as the three of them reached for their utensils, then stepped forward with 3 prepared plates. But instead of placing them in front of the men, I walked past them and served Linda, my mother-in-law, Natalie, Kyle's wife, and myself. "Women eat first," I said, my voice soft as a breeze, but sharp enough to cut the tension in the room. The entire table went silent. Bruce raised an eyebrow as if he couldn't believe his ears. Kyle glanced around, waiting for someone to correct me. Daniel paused mid-pour with the water pitcher. "What did you say?" Daniel asked, eyes wide. I set my plate down in front of me, placed my napkin on my lap, and smiled at him. "It's tradition, right? Women eating after men is just one part of it. Tonight we're starting a new part." Bruce pushed his chair back slightly, jaw tight. "We don't do silly things like this." I cut into the tenderloin, chewing slowly. "Silly? Then why didn't anyone speak up last week when my plate was taken from me?" No one answered. Natalie glanced at me, then quietly at Kyle. Linda blinked rapidly, but for the first time, she picked up her fork without looking to Bruce for a signal. Daniel exhaled and set his glass down. "Karen, you're making everyone uncomfortable." I turned to him, still calm. "I was uncomfortable last week too, Daniel." But I didn't say anything. I just sat there, watching everyone eat the meal I cooked, while I was treated like I didn't exist. So, tonight, we're trying something new. The air in the room grew thick. But then Natalie, who always avoided eye contact with her husband, let out a small laugh, a real one. She looked at me with quiet gratitude. The dinner continued, with the 3 women enjoying their food while the 3 men sat awkwardly. Kyle muttered something about childish games, but no one responded. I ate slowly, savoring each bite of the creamy sauce on my tongue, feeling the quiet shift of power in that familiar dining room. When I took my last bite, I set down my fork, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and stood up. "Wonderful dinner. Now it's time for the next tradition." Bruce frowned. "What now?" I turned to the sink full of dishes. "Since the women cooked, the men wash." Kyle burst out laughing, thinking I was joking. But I didn't laugh. Neither did Linda or Natalie. The 3 of us quietly stood up, leaving the table behind. Daniel looked around like he was searching for an escape route, but there was no one to save him this time. He sighed, then stood up. "I'll get started." I watched him, saying nothing. In his eyes, I saw something change. Not anger, but realization, and maybe a bit of newfound respect. As Linda, Natalie, and I poured tea, I felt a small spark of hope stir in my chest. This dinner wasn't just a little stunt. It was a reminder. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly, even in their own kitchen. That night, after everyone had left, the house was wrapped in an odd silence. The sink was clean, the tablecloth neatly folded, but the air between Daniel and me was far from tidy. He sat at the dining table, a glass of water in hand, eyes fixed on the space ahead like he might find some answers there. I stood in the kitchen drying the last glass, then set it down with a soft clink. Quiet, but enough to make him look up. "What's going on, Karen?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I turned around, arms crossed. "What do you mean, Daniel?" "The dinner, that performance you put on. You made my whole family uncomfortable." I let out a dry chuckle, not from amusement. "Oh, and what about last week? When my plate was taken right in my own home, when no one said a word, not even you. When I had to sit and watch everyone eat like I didn't exist. Did anyone feel uncomfortable then? Did anyone feel ashamed?" Daniel set his glass down a bit harder than usual. "That was my dad. He grew up in a different time. He didn't mean any harm." "Then what does meaning harm look like?" I walked closer to the table, my voice calm but each word packed with weight. You defend him, but I'm not allowed to react? You went too far, Daniel said through clenched teeth. You turned dinner into a battleground. You embarrassed my dad in front of everyone. I stared at him. If he saw nothing wrong with taking my plate, why did everyone treat it like an insult when I did the same thing in reverse? Daniel didn't answer right away. He leaned on the table, rubbing his temples like he was trying to make sense of things in his own way. That's not how you handle things. You didn't need to retaliate. I clenched my fists. It wasn't retaliation. It was reflection. I showed them what it feels like to be dismissed, to be pushed aside. He looked up at me, his eyes a mix of disappointment and confusion. Karen, you're changing. I gave a faint, bitter smile. No, Daniel. I'm just done pretending to be okay with unfairness. He said nothing. The room filled with the ticking of the wall clock. It sounded like a countdown. From that day on, the distance between us grew. Daniel started leaving for work earlier, coming home later. Whenever I talked to Natalie or his mom on the phone, he always found a reason to leave the room. Every time I brought up what had happened, he pulled away, like avoiding it would make it disappear. One evening, while I was washing glasses, he stood behind me, his voice tired. You talk to Natalie all the time. Are you trying to turn her against Kyle? I set the glass down and turned around. I'm not turning anyone against anyone, but if she needs someone to talk to, I'll listen. Is that so wrong? Daniel shook his head. She's my brother's wife. You shouldn't get involved in other people's marriages. I looked at him for a long moment. And what about me? I'm your wife. Are you getting involved when you let me feel like a stranger in my own home? The question hung in the air. He didn't respond. He just walked out of the kitchen and headed upstairs without looking back. I stood there, hands still soapy, feeling like another piece of this marriage had slipped away. But deep down, I knew. If we didn't confront things, neither of us could save what was left. Daniel wasn't a bad person, but he was someone used to silence. The silence of his mother, his sister-in-law, and now his own. But me? I wasn't born to stay silent forever. And maybe that's what scared him. 3 days after that stormy dinner, I got a call close to 11 p.m. The screen lit up with Natalie. I was surprised. She'd never called this late. Usually just polite thank you texts after family gatherings. I answered right away. Karen. Her voice was so soft I had to press the phone tight to my ear to hear. What's wrong? Are you okay? I asked, sensing something wasn't right. There was silence on the other end. Then Natalie took a deep breath, like she was trying to summon courage. I don't know where to start, but I need to talk to you. Before I convince myself I'm just imagining everything, I sat down on the sofa and turned on the side lamp. I'm listening. I know Mark is controlling my life. Bit by bit, so slowly, I didn't even realize it. Her words hit me hard. I'd always noticed the nervous look in Natalie's eyes, the forced smiles at family dinners. But I never thought she'd open up. Can you tell me more? I said gently. Mark, he doesn't yell, doesn't slam things. He doesn't have to. One look, one frown, and I go silent. I'm not allowed to wear things he doesn't like. He picks out my lipstick. My friends, there are only a few left, and even they hesitate to visit because Mark always gives them a look. And my mother-in-law, she always takes his side. I didn't interrupt. I let her keep going, because maybe this was the first time Natalie had ever spoken the truth out loud. Last week, she said, her voice cracking. When you stood up, took the plate from Bruce and gave it to me, I froze. I'd never seen anyone do something like that. And the weird thing is, I felt relief. Just for a moment. But I imagined being the one who did it. I pressed my lips together, hearing the tremble in her voice. Since then, I've been thinking, am I crazy for seeing that as wrong? Am I selfish for wanting to make my own choices in my own life? No, Natalie, I said firmly. You're not crazy, and you're definitely not selfish. She was quiet, then whispered, I think you're brave. I want to be like you, but I'm scared, really scared. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I knew that fear. It didn't have a clear shape, but it crept into everything. I'd felt it in my own kitchen, when no one stood by me. Do you want to leave? I asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to run right now, but another part thinks, if I do, Mark will tell the whole family I've been influenced by you. That I'm disobedient. That you've poisoned me. You don't have to listen to what they say, I replied. Natalie, you're finally seeing the truth, and that's the only thing that matters. If you need a place to think, to stay, my home is always open to you. No one gets to control your life, not your husband, not your family. No one. She stayed silent for a while, then whispered, Thank you, Karen. I'm not ready to leave yet, but at least I know I'm not alone anymore. I ended the call with a heavy heart. I knew this was just the beginning of a long journey. But when a woman like Natalie, who'd always been quiet, started to speak up, the earthquake had already begun in their family. Slow, but certain. I looked out the window. Moonlight stretched across the lawn. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew that after everything, silence was no longer an option. And I wasn't the only one who realized that anymore. Natalie came to my house on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon, the wind rustling outside, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. She walked in with a pale face, carrying a small suitcase and a tote bag stuffed with a few pieces of clothing. Her eyes were red, but there were no more tears, only exhaustion deep to the bone. I don't know how much longer I can take it, she whispered as I pulled her inside and closed the door behind her. I held her tightly. You don't have to take it anymore. Natalie nodded quietly, then sank into the couch like she'd just escaped a storm. I handed her a glass of water, helped her settle into the guest room, laid out blankets, and left clean pajamas in the drawer. I just went to a law office to ask questions, Natalie said after the simple dinner I'd cooked. Just to ask. But Mark found the brochure in my purse. He went crazy. I stopped washing dishes and turned to look at her. He asked if you'd poisoned me. Then he grabbed my phone, read all the messages, made me swear I wouldn't talk to you again. I was scared. I knew if I didn't leave right then, I'd lose myself completely. I gently squeezed her hand. You did the right thing, Natalie. We thought we had more time. But just a few hours later, close to 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. Not fast, not slow, but with a chill that sent a shiver through the house. I peeked through the side window. Outside stood Mark, rigid like a statue, his eyes burning. And beside him was Bruce, hands in his pockets, his stare as heavy as the storm-filled sky. I felt Natalie trembling behind me. No way. They found me. I turned to her. You don't have to open the door. You don't owe them any explanation. Richard came out from the bedroom, still in his pajamas. He glanced at the window, his expression shifting from confusion to alertness. What's going on? He asked. I hesitated for a moment. Natalie's staying here. She left Kyle's house tonight. His eyes widened. You let her hide here without telling me? What would you have done if I had? I replied calmly. She needed safety. I don't need your permission to do what's right. He opened his mouth to say something, but the doorbell rang again. This time longer, more forceful. Then came the knocking, louder than before. Mark shouted, Natalie, I know you're in there. Come out and talk. Natalie pressed herself against the wall, lips tightly sealed. Bruce's voice followed, low and heavy. Karen, you should know that when a woman interferes in another family's business, the consequences are never gentle. I tightened my grip on the door handle, trying to stay calm. Richard stepped up and touched my shoulder. I'll talk to them. No, I shook my head. They came here for me. I won't hide behind anyone. I opened the door, letting the porch light fall on Mark's furious face and Bruce's cold stare. Natalie stood behind me, clutching the hem of her shirt. "What do you think you're doing here?" Bruce growled. "Pulling a wife away from her husband? You're destroying this family." I kept my voice steady. "No one is destroying anything. Natalie came here because she needed space to think. No one has the right to force her back to a place that makes her feel afraid." Mark stepped forward, eyes bloodshot. "You're my wife. You can't just disappear like this. She," he pointed at me, "is filling your head with lies." Richard finally spoke from behind me. "Mark, back off." Mark snapped around. "And you? You're letting your wife meddle in someone else's marriage and saying nothing?" Bruce cut in. "Daniel, don't you see she's poisoning this whole family? She's making your brother lose his wife, making your mother stay silent, making you question your own family?" I looked Bruce straight in the eye. "If truth can be called poison, then maybe this family's been sick for a long time." Bruce narrowed his eyes, every muscle in his face tense. "My son doesn't need a wife like you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because behind me, Natalie stepped forward, her voice shaky but clear. "If your family can't accept that I have the right to think and choose for myself, then maybe I don't belong in it anymore." Mark looked at Natalie like something he owned had just been taken from him. His face turned red, lips tight, his eyes no longer angry but shocked. Bruce stood beside his son, silent for a second before stepping forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "What did you just say?" Natalie took a deep breath. For the first time, she didn't hide behind me. She didn't avoid her husband's gaze. She didn't bow her head out of fear. I said, "I'm getting a divorce." Her voice wasn't loud, but each word landed with the weight of truth in the tense air on my porch. Bruce let out a short, bitter laugh. "No woman in this family gets divorced. You're Mark's wife. It's your duty to hold the family together, not tear it apart." Natalie didn't flinch. "I tried, for years. But a family can't survive when one person is being suffocated every single day." Mark clenched his fists, stepped forward. "You don't get to make that decision on your own." "I've been silent for too long, Mark," Natalie replied, her voice trembling slightly but not breaking. "Now I'm making decisions for myself." Bruce turned to Richard, searching for support. "Don't you see? This is what happens when women think they can do whatever they want. You need to leave this house before you're dragged down too." I stood still, waiting. I knew this moment would come. The choice. The truth. Richard looked around. His eyes passed over Natalie, then stopped at me. The whole house held its breath. I said nothing. No pleading, no convincing. This wasn't my battle anymore. This was his. "I'm not going anywhere," Richard said, slow but firm. Bruce's eyes widened, stunned. "What did you just say?" Richard took a deep breath, as if pulling the words from somewhere long buried. "I've stayed silent too long, let things happen unchecked. But tonight, when I saw Natalie's eyes, when I saw how you looked at my wife, I realized something." He turned to me, eyes filled with clarity. "Karen isn't destroying this family. She's just exposing the cracks that were already there." Bruce growled. "She's turning you against your own father." Richard replied, his voice steady now. "You turned your back on respect a long time ago. I'm just stepping out of the darkness." Mark stared, stunned that his own brother had said those words in front of Bruce. Natalie let out a long breath, as if releasing a weight she'd carried for years. Bruce turned away, his face flushed with fury. "If you leave this family, don't expect to come back." Richard didn't respond, but his eyes were steady, unshaken. I stepped forward, stood beside him, and gently took his hand. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't let go. Mark stepped back, his eyes lost. Bruce growled. "Let's go." No one saw them out. No goodbyes. Just the slam of a car door and the fading taillights disappearing into the night. When the dust settled, the house fell completely silent. Natalie sank into the couch, her hands covering her face. I handed her a glass of water and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. Richard still stood there, staring at the window where his father's car had vanished. I walked over to him and asked softly, "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. After a moment, he said quietly, "I don't know. I lost something tonight, but at the same time, I feel like I found something else. You. And the truth." I nodded. "It won't be easy, but it's a beginning." That night, we didn't sleep much, but in that silence, there was no more distance, no more truths hidden in half-spoken words. Everything was clear now, painful, but real. And I knew that every storm eventually passes, as long as you're not standing alone in the wind. 3 months after that night, Natalie officially filed for divorce. She found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes' drive from my house. The walls were painted cream and the windows looked out onto a row of maple trees just beginning to turn. The first time I visited, Natalie stood in the middle of her empty living room, holding a small potted plant, smiling softly. A real smile, not forced, not cautious. "I know it's not big," she said, "but I feel like I can breathe here." She started going to therapy regularly each week. Some days she'd come over with red eyes, but every time she left, her steps were steadier. Natalie was no longer the woman who apologized with every breath. She was learning to speak her mind, not for anyone's approval, but to remind herself she had the right to do so. As for my mother-in-law, Linda, she quietly disappeared just 2 weeks after Bruce stormed out of the house in anger. One evening, Richard received a message from an unknown number with just a few lines. "I'm okay. I just need some space." We later found out she was living in a small coastal town in Oregon, renting a simple home and working part-time at a local bookstore. When Richard called her, for the first time in years, I saw him truly listen. Linda said she didn't know how long she'd been enduring things, only that when Natalie stood up, she finally started looking at herself. "Maybe I should have left long ago," she said. "But at least now, I'm starting over. It's not too late, is it?" Richard couldn't answer. But after that call, he sat quietly on the balcony for nearly an hour, saying nothing. When I brought him a cup of hot tea, he looked up at me, his eyes red. "I let everything pass like it was just the way things were," he said. "But you weren't afraid to be misunderstood, to speak up for what's right." I held his hand. No words were needed. The change in Richard didn't happen overnight. Growing up in the shadow of a dominant father doesn't disappear in one evening. But I could see his effort, in the way he stopped interrupting when I spoke, in how he asked for my thoughts before making joint decisions, in the times he stepped into the kitchen and said, "Let me cook today." We started over, not from zero, but from a new foundation: respect. One early spring evening, when tulips began blooming in the backyard, Richard sat beside me on the wooden bench. He held my hand and smiled. "I used to think I'd lost my family, but it turns out I only lost what was fake." I rested my head on his shoulder, gazing up at the sky tinted gold. We don't have to hold on to what suffocates us just to call it family. A gentle breeze swept through, and in that moment, I felt truly free. My home was no longer a place where I held my breath walking into the kitchen or tiptoed around judgmental stairs. It was a place where Natalie sometimes dropped by with freshly baked cookies, where Richard and I cooked together, read together, shared peaceful silence together. And I, Karen, was no longer the woman sitting and waiting for a plate of food in her own home. I was the one who reset the table, made space for myself, and opened more seats for women who had always been told to stand in the back. We didn't just find fairness. We found ourselves again. From my story, I realized that silence is never the solution when facing injustice. Sometimes, to change a system that's outdated and broken, you have to be brave enough to speak up, even if it means facing opposition from those closest to you. I didn't just reclaim my own voice. I helped the other women in my family find theirs too. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: respect is not something given. It's something you must claim for yourself. What do you think about Karen's story and her choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and powerful stories about family and life. My name is Jennifer. I was born just 3 minutes after my twin sister Rachel. But those 3 minutes might as well have been a lifetime, given how differently our parents treated us. Our family lived in a 2-story white house in the suburbs of Nashville, Tennessee. My mother, Catherine, was a well-known real estate agent, always appearing with neatly styled hair, an expensive suit, and a phone that never left her hand. My father, Marcus, ran a small accounting office, buried in ledgers all day, rarely looking up to acknowledge his younger daughter. At first glance, we seemed like a typical middle-class family, perhaps even admirable. But only those who lived in that house knew the truth. Fairness never existed there. From a very young age, I could feel that my parents' love was never equally divided. When Rachel and I were about 4, Mom used to take us shopping on weekends, but every time we left the mall, Rachel's bags were always heavier. She got the newest Converse sneakers while I had to pretend to be excited about the discounted pair from the bottom shelf. Every time Rachel pointed at something, it almost instantly ended up in the shopping cart, and when I carefully asked, "Mom, can I have?" she'd cut me off with a cold glance. Not always, Jennifer. Our earliest birthday gifts made it clear where I stood in their hearts. Though we shared the same birthday, Rachel always got the bigger slice of cake, the prettier presents, and more people wishing her well. I remember quietly counting. 11 people hugged her. 3 hugged me, and 2 of those were housekeepers. It was the same with toys. Rachel had an entire shelf of limited edition Barbies, while I played with soft plastic dolls with thinning hair, probably from the clearance bin at the local store. Even our mini strollers were different. Hers was pink and played music. Mine was dull gray with squeaky, stuck wheels. I used to convince myself I was just imagining things, that maybe I was too sensitive. But when we started preschool, the favoritism was no longer subtle. It was impossible to deny. On the first day of class, Mom dressed us in identical uniforms: red plaid skirts, white blouses, and knee-high socks. I remember feeling excited that finally we looked the same in adults' eyes. But when Mom stood on the steps holding up her phone, I heard her voice ring out clearly. "Rachel, sweetheart, lift your chin. Tilt your head just a little. Perfect." And me? I was just a blurry shadow next to her, my eyes peeking out from behind Rachel's shoulder. After that day, everything followed a set pattern. Every afternoon, Mom would park at the school gate, open the car door, and say the familiar line, "Jennifer, go home and do your homework. I'm taking Rachel to art class." Monday was art, Tuesday piano, Wednesday dance, Thursday acting, and Friday, sometimes just ice cream to relax after a long week. I'd walk into an empty house, drop my backpack on the chair, and cook instant noodles. The only sound was the ticking clock, occasionally interrupted by the washing machine spinning loudly. When I asked why I couldn't take art classes like Rachel, Mom just sighed. "Not everyone is cut out for the arts. You should focus on doing well in school. That would be better." So I did. I studied hard. But my good grades never once made my parents pause their dinner to applaud me, the way they did when Rachel drew a cat that looked like a smudged ink blot. I started to realize something. No matter how hard I tried, I only became more invisible in my own home. Rachel was always the center, and I was just the background, a forgettable detail people looked right past. When we turned 10, Mom started talking about investing in the future. I didn't fully understand what she meant, but I listened carefully. Eventually, I realized that investment only applied to Rachel. New extracurriculars every month, violin lessons downtown, Wednesday night coding classes, weekend debate clubs. And me? I once asked if I could join a creative writing group at the local library. Without even looking up from her phone, Mom replied coldly, "Not this month, money's tight." A few days later, I saw her swipe her credit card to buy Rachel a new performance dress at a boutique downtown. I said nothing. I had learned that speaking up only earned me cold stares or carefully crafted excuses. "You don't understand. Rachel has talent. You just need to focus on your studies." So I did. I buried myself in books as the only way to prove I deserved to be seen. Math quizzes? I always got perfect scores. Essays? My teacher often used mine as the class example. I was even chosen to represent our class in the district debate, even though I had never joined a club before. But that night at dinner, when I proudly told everyone I'd be representing the school, Mom barely nodded before turning to Rachel. "Sweetheart, how was art class today?" I remember going silent, my hand gripping the fork, lips pressed together so I wouldn't say something I'd regret. I started writing everything down in a journal hidden under my pillow. Every comment that hurt, every moment I was ignored, every time I wondered, if I didn't exist, would anything be different? The answer came on a cloudy night when I crept downstairs for a glass of water after studying late. The house was strangely quiet. Light spilled from the living room, and I slowed my steps. I heard my father's voice, low and tired, as if shedding a mask. "Do you think we really need to try with both girls?" he asked. Mom sighed. "Jennifer's fine. She can handle herself. See? She runs without being pushed. But Rachel's different. She needs us to push, to guide. She has potential, Marcus. She was born to shine." "What about Jennifer?" My father's voice lowered. "Have you ever thought that if we only had Rachel, life would have been less stressful?" I stood frozen in the hallway. My chest felt tight, like my heart had been squeezed. I bit my lip to stop myself from crying out loud. "She's a good kid," my mother said, her voice softer. "But sometimes, I feel like having just one would have been enough." I turned around and ran to my room. The notebook under my pillow was no longer a place for memories. That night, I tore out each page and threw them slowly into the trash. With every sheet I dropped, it felt like I was letting go of the last pieces of faith I had left. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't ask why. I just sat there, staring at the ceiling where those glow-in-the-dark stars we once stuck up as kids still hung. I counted them. Rachel had 27 stars. I had only 13. Even the sky above my bed was divided unfairly. But I swore to myself, if they couldn't see me while I was right in front of them, then someday, they'd have no choice but to look up. When I was standing tall, where no one could ignore me. After that night, I felt reborn. I no longer longed for Mom to pat my head when I got a good grade, or for Dad to ask how school was going. I stopped trying to be seen. Instead, I started studying for myself. I spent most of my time in the school library. I arrived earlier than anyone, stayed later than everyone. I read more than the textbooks required, took neat notes, practiced sample tests that others never bothered to look at. The teachers noticed. Mr. Brandt, our history teacher, called on me for the first time in class. "Jennifer, what's your opinion on Roosevelt's New Deal policy?" I looked up, a bit surprised. Then I started answering, point by point with examples I had prepared the night before. When I finished, the class was silent for a few seconds, before he nodded slowly. "Very good. Precise, insightful, and articulate." I caught Rachel glancing at me, her eyes filled with disbelief, as if she had just witnessed something unnatural. That surprise quickly turned into irritation. When my English essay was posted on the board as a model, Rachel mumbled to her friend next to her. "The teachers are clearly biased. They probably feel sorry for her, that's why they're praising her." More and more, teachers began to trust me. Ms. Lane asked me to lead our end-of-term discussion group. Mr. Reynolds nominated me for the state academic competition team. Rachel reacted more strongly each time. She'd tap her pen angrily on her desk whenever I was praised, or deliberately voiced opposing opinions during debates, even if they barely made sense. And one day I walked into class and noticed Rachel wasn't at her seat. The room felt different. Students were whispering. The principal had just left. Miss Lane waved me into the hallway. "Jennifer, there's something you should know," she said gently, still composed. "Your mother came to the school. She's in the principal's office. Rachel told her that teachers were intentionally favoring you to make her feel small." I stood still. I wasn't surprised Rachel said that, but I hadn't expected Mom to actually show up at school. I walked quietly past the office and peeked through the glass. There she was, Catherine Harper, in a plum-colored business dress, arms crossed, pointing at some documents the principal was trying to explain. Rachel is an outstanding student, but Jennifer, all she does is bury herself in books. She's not a leader. She's not creative. Pushing her like this is only hurting my daughter. The principal stayed calm. "Mrs. Harper, we have clear academic records. Jennifer ranks highest in 4 core subjects. All her teachers unanimously agree." I heard my mother say, "Grades aren't everything. Your teachers are clearly biased." A few minutes later, she left the office. I ducked into the side hallway before she could see me, but inside, something had gone cold. That night, I heard her footsteps as she returned home. Rachel's door opened, then closed again. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I heard their soft laughter, the kind I'd never once heard directed at me. The next morning, when I arrived at school, a small envelope was on the teacher's desk. I didn't need to open it to know what it said, but Mr. Brandt spoke before I could react. "Jennifer, don't let outside noise get to you. You deserve every bit of recognition you're receiving." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I know, and I won't stop." I returned to my desk, opened my notebook. On the first page, I had written a line I reminded myself of every day. "They may not choose me, but I will choose myself." From that moment on, I didn't just study to escape the darkness. I studied to become the light. When I turned 16, I decided to get a part-time job at a bakery 3 blocks from home. It was a small shop called Sugar Bloom, with cream-colored walls and the scent of butter cookies always hanging in the air. The owner, Martha, was in her 40s, usually tied her hair with a silk scarf, and always wore a warm smile. I didn't tell Mom. I knew she wouldn't approve. To her, getting a job at this age meant you have no direction. But to me, it meant a little bit of freedom in a world where I was rarely allowed to choose. That evening, wearing my pale pink apron and hair tied up neatly, I walked out the door. Rachel glanced up from her phone and smirked. "Going to be a waitress? Cool. Just try not to drop cake on someone's dress." I didn't answer, but inside I knew. I had just taken my first step out of the shadow they kept forcing me into. After a few weeks, I managed to save my first small paycheck. It wasn't much, but enough for me to buy the books I loved without second thoughts. One evening, while looking for modern social change in America in Mom's office bookshelf, I accidentally knocked over a stack of old folders. While cleaning up, I found a worn, light brown notebook. The first page had a handwritten note. "Emergency contacts, do not use." I flipped through a few pages and stopped at an entry labeled "Clara and Henry Whitmore, no contact, number blocked." Below it was a handwritten address in the southern part of the city I'd never heard of before. "Clara Whitmore?" I whispered the name to myself all night. The surname matched Mom's maiden name. Henry. Maybe my grandfather? But why had I never heard of them? The next day, while Mom and Rachel were off at their weekend spa appointment, I took bus 14 to the address in the notebook. It led me to a small, sky-blue wooden house with a short white fence and a front yard full of blooming yellow daisies. The house was modest, simple, but full of life. I hesitated a few seconds before knocking. A petite woman with silver hair opened the door. She stared at me, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "Who are you?" she asked softly. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "I'm Jennifer Harper. I think You might be my grandmother? She raised her hand to her mouth and stepped back slightly, as if she was seeing a ghost from her past. Behind her, a man with snowy white hair and thick glasses appeared, holding a cup of tea. When he saw me, he almost dropped it. Clara, look closely. It's her. It's our granddaughter. None of us said a word for several minutes. Then Grandma Clara pulled me into the house, wrapping me in a hug so tight, it felt like she was afraid I might disappear. That little house was like a whole different world compared to the cold one I grew up in. The walls were covered with hand-drawn pictures and old photographs. The scent of apple pie lingered in the air. They invited me to sit at the dining table, poured me a cup of hot tea, and began asking me question after question. They knew who I was, but had never had the chance to meet me. After your mother got married, she said we were too old-fashioned, that we didn't fit her new lifestyle, Grandpa Henry said. And then she cut us off. We called, wrote letters, but never heard back. You're the first to come find us, Grandma Clara said, her eyes red. We used to dream of taking you to the zoo, teaching you how to bake, but then I didn't say a word. My throat was tight. I didn't have the heart to tell them that I had only learned their names less than 24 hours ago. I stayed until evening, helped Grandma wash dishes, and listened to Grandpa tell stories from his youth. Before I left, he handed me a small envelope for bus fare. And if you'd like, next time, stay for dinner. On the way home, I opened the envelope. Inside, along with a bit of cash, was a handwritten note. You are always welcome here, always. I held on to that note all night. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere that didn't require conditions or achievements. Just me, as I was. Graduation day came faster than I expected. The last months of senior year flew by in a blur of heavy schedules, final exams, and late nights studying at the library. And then, that morning, I stood on the stage of West Haven High's auditorium in a navy blue gown, listening to the announcer call my name as the valedictorian of the class of 2024. Applause echoed through the room, but when I looked down at the row reserved for parents, I saw my mother looking at her phone, and my father chatting with Rachel, who sighed loudly like I had just stolen her spotlight. I walked up to the podium, accepted my diploma, and gave my short thank you speech. My voice was steady, every word clear, but inside I felt strangely hollow. That evening there was no celebration, no balloons, no cake, no congratulations Jennifer sign. Just an ordinary dinner, grilled fish and salad. My mom told Rachel to cut back on fried food to stay fit for the upcoming trip, and Dad talked about a difficult client at work. No one mentioned me, even though I had just graduated top of the class. After I finished washing the dishes and was heading upstairs, Mom suddenly called out. Her voice was unusually excited. Jennifer, sit down. I have some good news. I sat down slowly, tilting my head slightly, hoping for something unexpected. We're going to Hawaii, a 5-day vacation in Maui to celebrate Rachel's graduation, Mom announced like she was revealing the winner of a game show. Rachel smiled, not forgetting to give me a smug little look. I froze. We means who? I asked slowly. Mom waved her hand like it was no big deal. Oh, your dad, me, and Rachel. I only booked 3 tickets. You know how expensive flights are this time of year. Plus, someone has to stay home and keep working at the bakery. I looked her straight in the eyes. So you mean I'm staying behind? Alone. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her expression like she was comforting a child who just dropped their ice cream. You understand. You're strong, independent. We trust you. I didn't say another word. I stood up, nodded like a machine, and quietly went upstairs. The next morning, when I heard the car door slam shut, I peeked out the window. They were loading suitcases into the trunk. Rachel wore a cream maxi dress, her hair softly curled, holding her plane ticket and favorite latte. Mom waved up at me. Rachel beamed. I'll tag you in my beach pics, okay? Don't be jealous. The car door closed, and their SUV slowly pulled out of the driveway. I turned away, picked up my phone, and for the first time in months, I called the number saved under a simple name. Grandma and Grandpa. Grandma Clara's voice answered, warm and steady as always. I couldn't hold back the tears. They left. I choked. They just left me, like I'm nothing. Oh, sweetheart, don't cry. Come over right now. We're gonna throw you the graduation celebration you truly deserve. I arrived at their house by noon. That little home was decorated with white and blue ribbons, balloons hanging from the windows. The table was covered with a white cloth, and on it sat a chocolate cake with frosting that read, "Congratulations, Jennifer, our amazing valedictorian." But that wasn't all. After a lunch filled with all my favorite dishes, crispy baked lasagna and fruit salad, Grandpa Henry placed a small black box on the table. "You've done something very few people ever do. We're so proud of you, and this is our gift to you." I opened the box. Inside was a brand new car key, with a keychain engraved with the words, "Always believe in your own path." My eyes widened. You're kidding, right?" Grandpa smiled and pointed toward the window. In the front yard sat a milk-white Audi Q3, sparkling new. The license plate hadn't been installed yet, and the documents were still tucked in a plastic sleeve hanging behind the seat. "That car is yours, a graduation gift from us," Grandma Clara said, holding my hand. "We've been planning this for a long time, just waiting for the right moment." I hugged them tightly, tears streaming down my face, but no longer from pain. For the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't have to bleed for recognition. 2 weeks passed after their trip to Hawaii, and I lived in days more peaceful and warm than any vacation I had ever imagined. In the mornings, I drove my new Audi to Sugar Bloom Bakery, bringing butter cookies for my grandparents. In the evenings, I helped Grandma Clara prepare dinner while Grandpa Henry read the paper and told stories from his days as an engineer. For the first time, I felt at ease, no longer straining to earn affection. The Audi parked neatly in front of our house, a quiet symbol of something my parents had never given me: recognition, trust, and unconditional love. And then the day I had predicted finally came. It was a mild Friday afternoon in Nashville. I was reading on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea still warm in my hands when the familiar SUV slowly pulled into the driveway. The three of them stepped out, Mom in a purple silk maxi dress, Dad with his sunglasses on, and Rachel, of course, in a designer outfit, dragging her suitcase like she was arriving on a red carpet. Mom was the first to see the car. She froze mid-step, lips pressed tight, her eyes moving from the Audi logo to the temporary tag, then to the chrome side mirrors. Rachel squinted, shielding her eyes from the sun, then turned to me. "Whose car is that?" I stood up, smiling softly. "Mine." Dad walked closer, his voice slower. "Jennifer, are you joking? That car costs over 40 grand. I nodded, pulled the key from my pocket and twirled it around my finger. Just like Rachel used to do with her designer purse straps. A graduation gift, from Grandma Clara and Grandpa Henry. Silence fell for a few seconds. My mother's face changed color faster than when she saw the stock market drop. She immediately grabbed her phone, dialing so quickly her hands were almost shaking. Dad stood frozen, and Rachel let out a short laugh, half mocking, half unsure. The call connected. "Clara, it's Catherine. I need an explanation. You bought Jennifer a car? Do you even realize what this implies?" I could hear Grandma Clara's voice clearly over speaker. Warm, calm, unfazed. "Hello, dear. Did you enjoy your Hawaii vacation? That has nothing to do with this. How could you even afford that? All this time, we've kept quiet because we don't need to show off, Catherine." She cut in gently but firmly. "After you cut us off, we invested in a few tech ventures. Now, we live comfortably and have chosen to use the rest to support someone who truly values family." Mom gripped the phone tighter. "Jennifer is my granddaughter, but so is Rachel. If there's a gift, it should be fair. She needs a car too." She's getting ready for college. I almost laughed. She'd just got back from Hawaii, tan and covered in Instagram check-ins, and now she wanted fairness? Then Grandpa Henry's voice came in, deep and steady. Catherine, fairness is a good thing, but you seem to have forgotten that fairness must come with love. Jennifer has never been treated like a daughter by you. Now, we've chosen her as our heir. All our assets, savings, and property will be in her name. Rachel's eyes widened, and my father murmured, Catherine? You haven't spoken to them in years. How could you know they even had that kind of wealth? Mom stood frozen, the phone still to her ear, but nothing more was said. The line had gone dead. Her eyes darkened and she turned to me. Jennifer, you need to think carefully. You know Rachel needs the car for school. You're just working at a bakery. You don't need something this fancy. I stepped closer, popped open the trunk. The suitcases I had packed 2 days earlier sat neatly inside. I pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. Inside is a copy of my acceptance letter from Columbia University. I received a full scholarship, tuition, housing, living expenses, all covered. And no, I won't be working at the bakery forever. But at least I'll never have to trade my dignity for affection. Rachel wasn't smiling anymore. Dad said nothing, just looked at me like he had lost something he never realized was important. I had just opened the car door when Mom stepped in front of it, arms crossed, eyes sharp, like she was about to deliver a lecture. Jennifer, you can't keep that car, she said coldly, her patience clearly gone. Rachel is the one who needs it for school. She just got into State University. And you? Aren't you just working at a bakery? I looked up at her, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I don't work at the bakery anymore. And I'm not staying here. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and pressuring. Jennifer, you need to be realistic. Rachel has a college plan, a social network, a future. She needs the car to build that. And you? What do you have? I reached into my bag, pulled out a neatly clipped folder and handed it to him. An acceptance letter from Columbia with a full scholarship, covers tuition, housing, and living expenses. They both stood speechless for a few seconds. Rachel stopped typing on her phone, turning to me as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Columbia? My mom repeated, her voice suddenly quieter. You mean New York? I nodded. Yes. I'll be studying law and social policy. Classes start in 3 weeks. But why didn't you say anything? Dad asked. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine confusion in his eyes. I shrugged. Because I already knew what you'd say. We can't afford it, it's not necessary, save it for Rachel. I looked up, locking eyes with Mom. But my grandparents believed in me. They thought I was worth it. Rachel stepped forward, arms crossed, scoffing. What about the car? You're seriously taking that to New York? Where are you going to park it? Right outside your dorm? Trying to make a scene? I turned back, opened the trunk, revealing 2 large suitcases, a tote bag, and a neatly wrapped laptop. I had been ready long before they returned. Don't worry, I said, closing the trunk. You won't have to see it, because I won't be coming back. Mom stood speechless, then suddenly changed her tone. Jennifer, listen to me. Don't overreact. I just want what's best for both of you. Every family plays favorites sometimes, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. I shook my head, lips pressed tightly. Love can't be one-sided. I can't keep living with that kind of a little bit anymore. My dad stepped forward, placing his hand on the car door. If you drive that car away, you'll be on your own. No one here will help you anymore. I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, I saw the conditions behind everything they'd ever called help. And I knew. I was ready to let it go. I'll take responsibility for my own life, one step at a time. I closed the door and started the engine. Rachel stood with her hands on her hips, trying to smirk, but her eyes betrayed her. My mom turned away, staring at the concrete driveway like she was searching for a comeback she couldn't find. My dad still stood there, his hand now off the car but not stepping back. "Jennifer?" he said. His voice, for once, without command. "If you ever feel overwhelmed, I'll be okay." I cut him off with a small nod. "And this time, I don't need anyone to confirm that." I pressed the gas. The Audi rolled slowly away from the familiar driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw them, those three figures still standing there, growing smaller in the distance. The road ahead didn't promise to be easy, but it was mine, not handed to me, not paved by anyone else. Each step forward was a step of true freedom. I left Nashville on a late summer morning, the sky unusually clear. The Audi glided along the interstate, and ahead of me opened a brand new chapter. New York City, Columbia University, youthful dreams, and a completely new life waiting to unfold. My grandparents insisted on driving behind me in Grandpa Henry's old sedan. They didn't say much, but I knew every time I looked in the mirror, they were still there. Steady, silent, and full of faith. Before we parted ways, Grandma Clara hugged me tightly outside the dorm gates. "You've gone farther than anyone ever imagined," she said, her warm eyes glowing with pride. "And you never had to do it alone." I smiled, burying my face on her shoulder. I had never felt so protected, even though I was officially on my own now. College life swept me into a completely new rhythm. Classes at Columbia were challenging, with brilliant professors and classmates from all over the world. I worked part-time at a small bookstore near Brooklyn, where the smell of old pages and the soft jingle of the front door brought me more peace than anything else. I began building a life where I didn't need to look over my shoulder for permission. No more judgmental stares, no more subtle comparisons masked in sweet words. Here, I was Jennifer, not Rachel's little sister, not the obedient one, just me. A few weeks later, Grandma Clara called me with news that didn't surprise me. "They came by this morning," she said, her voice calm, as if savoring each word. "Brought a fruit basket and plenty of apologies." I stayed silent for a moment. "What did they say?" "They said they missed you, that the family should come together again, that Rachel is struggling with tuition and thought, maybe we could help." I clenched the phone, but Grandma Clara's voice remained steady. "We invited them in, made tea, but didn't say much. And after they left, your grandpa and I agreed, everything. The property, savings, bank accounts, it's all going to you." I sat still in my dorm room, the afternoon light streaming through the window onto my law textbooks. I didn't know what I felt. Bitterness, vindication, or sadness. "Grandma," I whispered, "are you sure? I don't need—" "It's not because you need it," she interrupted, gentle but firm. "It's because you deserve it. You're the only one who never treated us like a burden." Tears welled up. In that moment, I knew. True love never comes with conditions. I didn't respond to the message my mom sent 2 days later, her first text in over a month. She used that familiar tone. "I know you're upset, but we're still family, right?" I wasn't upset anymore. I didn't feel resentment. I simply no longer felt the need to hold on to something that was never really mine. I hit block contact without hesitation. Time flew in New York. I adjusted better than I expected. My new friends, Layla, an Egyptian-American journalism major, and Ethan, an economics student from Oregon, made me feel truly valued. We studied together at Butler Library, grabbed midnight pizza from the corner shop, and on some nights sat on the dorm balcony, watching the city lights sparkle, dreaming about the future, like it was all within reach. One Sunday night, after closing the bookstore, I got a message from Ethan. "Coffee on the corner, 9 p.m. I've already got us a table." I looked at my phone and smiled. No more pressure to prove myself. No more comparisons. No more hunger for love that came only with pity. I had my life, a beginning that wasn't perfect, but an ending shaped by my own choice. I chose myself, chose peace, and chose to move forward without looking back. From my own story, I've realized that not every wound needs healing through forgiveness. Sometimes what we really need is to let go. I once tried so hard to be acknowledged, but I found my worth only when I stopped seeking validation from those who never truly valued me. Family isn't just where we come from. It's where we're loved without conditions. And true happiness begins the moment we find the courage to choose ourselves. What do you think of Jennifer's decision? Should she have forgiven her family? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and meaningful family stories.